What's up you guys, Tim Trevathan with Trevathan Homes here on another Back to the Basics video. Be sure to check out my other ones if you haven't. This is about the buying process, because what about the buying process do we not know? Probably a lot. And if you're wanting to buy a house, well, you gotta know these things. So this one in particular we're gonna go over is the inspection period, also known as the due diligence period. So are you ready? Because I got a lot of good information waiting. Let's get started. Once you're under contract with a home, there is this thing called due diligence period. This is a time that you have the right to inspect the home. You'll want to be able to do this on a home so that you're not surprised with anything that will end up costing you so much money later that you have to repair. Now, of course, there may be things you have to repair regardless once you become a homeowner, but it's nice to be able to know anything that is very extreme in nature before you purchase the home. Now, a lot of times, I have buyers, one thing that they are mistaken to believe what inspection period is if the home has something that's old, you can ask the seller to replace it. Doesn't work that way. The primary reason for an inspection is three things. That you find out if anything is broken, that is a safety hazard, or is a code violation. So if you already know ahead of time that the roof is 20 years old, as the seller will normally provide a property disclosure form that has all the details listed out about what they know already of their home since they lived in it, then it shouldn't be a surprise that it's a 20-year-old roof. If the inspection comes back saying home has a roof that's older with some wear and tear, maybe some granule loss, but it's still got life, well, we can't ask for a replacement of the roof because we just know that it's old. However, if we saw that there's massive hail damage, or that there's a hole in a shingle, missing shingles, if we see that it's beyond its lifespan, it has to be replaced, there's an active water leak, that's a different story. We can ask for those things. Now, what is a typical length of time for a due diligence period? Well, back in 2016, when I first was practicing real estate as a real estate licensed practitioner. That was kind of redundant, wasn't it? Basically, I was telling clients to do a 12-day due diligence period. This was back in 2016 again. Now it's shortened up in time. Back in 2019, you started seeing 10 days. Then in 2020, 2021, you started seeing 5 days and even 3 days. And in 2021, most of that year and the beginning of 2022, that was the most competitive time in the housing market ever. And there were times that, believe it or not, we had to waive the due diligence period. In other words, in that blank, we would put 0 days for due diligence period, basically telling the seller, hey, we are offering this price and we're not gonna do an inspection if you accept our terms. Meaning, they have a lot more leverage where if something breaks in the home, well, tough luck, it's on the buyer's end. And once you're under contract, you can't terminate without losing your earnest money, because due diligence period is the time in which you can do that and not lose it. So say if you have a 5-day due diligence period, that's the time you inspect. It doesn't just have to be if you as the buyer and the seller don't agree on repairs that causes you to terminate the contract and get your earnest money back. It can also just be if you get cold feet and change your mind and you don't want it, you get nervous, you can back out for that reason, as long as it's within that due diligence period. Now, with due diligence, when you're getting an inspector, you want to make sure that they're licensed and certified. And you want to ask for the other add-ons that you can do for your inspection. Typically, you do a regular home inspection that encompasses everything from heating and cooling to plumbing to the roof, interior and exterior, and as well as, water heater and other things related to plumbing and electricity. If you want other things, the other optional add-ons typically would include things like the swimming pool. If there is a swimming pool, they would inspect that. Sewer scope inspection, where they check the plumbing lines out front. And you can do a radon test, which oftentimes I would advise clients to do a radon test if it's an older house with a basement. If it's a newer home on a slab, probably don't need it because there's not going to be much of a chance of radon. What is radon, you ask? Well, good question. Here in Georgia, you've got the Appalachian Mountains, the tip of it come down here to Metro Atlanta. And sometimes you'll see the tectonic plates, the Earth's crust moving slowly but surely. And that kind of movement creates this radon gas. Kind of like carbon monoxide, it doesn't have a scent, but it can hurt you. It could cause lung cancer and other terrible things if you breathe it in for too long. Now, there are only a few times where I've seen radon, and I would say as far as buyers electing to do a radon test, it's about 40% of the time. And again, it depends on the house and the situation and what they really truly want to do. You're looking at an inspection fee, regular home inspection, that's usually, depending on the size of the home, anywhere from $400 to $600. A radon test will be another $185. A sewer scope inspection will run you closer to around $350. Then you got termite inspection, which depending on the place can do it for free or sometimes at a minimal cost of $50. They will come out, pest control company that also does termite, and they'll issue what's called a termite clearance letter if it's a home free and clear of termites. If you're on a VA loan, they require this termite clearance letter, so you have to get it no matter what. But it is an optional item, not part of the regular home inspection. And at bare minimum, I always tell clients to do the regular home inspection plus the termite inspection. Radon, again, as I was saying, is optional depending on the house. And sewer scope, I would say, is very helpful for an older home, such as in the 90s or 80s. If it was built then, and if you see a lot of mature trees around the house, there's a chance that you could have a penetration of the plumbing line with a tree root. In fact, it happened on my home. See here in this video where the bulldozer or the tractor basically came and excavated my front yard, and I kid you not, we ended up finding a big tree root there. And the good news is the inspection caught that. However, I want to mention one thing. As many inspections as you do, there will still be problems that an inspector cannot reveal, sometimes because of various reasons. For example, this is another story about my own house that I purchased. I realized after the inspection, he revealed to me that there is polybutylene piping in my home. Now, that is a type of piping that had lawsuits way back in the day, and it's because of the weak lining of the walls of the pipes that caused leaks. This was popular and oftentimes in homes in the early 90s. I've only seen polybutylene piping in 3 houses in 8 years in the business on the buyer side. Of course, one of those 3 times was my house. And what I found out, I could just let it go. The previous homeowner lived here for 20 years with no problems with plumbing. But the longer you let it go, the higher chance, more prone for those water leaks to occur. So I decided to be the good homeowner and responsible homeowner that I was and get it all replaced after receiving a credit from the seller to help cover the cost of polybutylene piping replacement with either PEX or PVC piping. It came out to about $12,000. And I did this and I was super happy because now my whole home is up to standard and I feel safe with my family in it. However, I want to say that even with an inspection, you can't catch certain things. Little did I know, this polybutylene piping expanded the water pressure once we turned it back on, and it caused it to pressurize out in the front yard where there was an irrigation system clipped on 2 ends where it was previously connected, and I don't think the last homeowner knew because it happened from the previous homeowner and they didn't disclose it. And in doing so, there is a small, tiny 6-inch piece of piping where they connected the water line from my house to the main city sewer line. It was right there in that 6-inch piece of piping where I had a main water line break. And that was part of the other reason why I had an excavation to my home. So just letting you know, you want to do an inspection for sure, but there's some things you might be surprised at later, but understand that's part of home ownership. Yes, you could say, well, I'm just going to rent forever, let the landlord do it. You could, but I believe in home ownership because it is the greatest investment for your life as you continue to pay off your mortgage, lower your debt as far as the mortgage balance goes, and the equity that is increased from that, as well as the home values appreciating over time. But we'll talk about that on another video. Again, this is about the inspection period. So once you've come to an agreement on this inspection, usually it involves either getting the seller to do repairs or giving you a credit towards closing costs or a combination of both. Now, I would say more often than not, especially in the last 12 months, what I've noticed with most sellers, they are opting to give a credit towards closing costs instead of doing repairs. Why? Because this makes things a lot easier on both parties, where they don't have to find a contractor who is available and can do the job within a short time frame prior to closing, and then also risk the chance that if the work is done in time, that when we come back to the home to do a final walkthrough and see what repairs were done, that they were not done to our satisfactory level. I've seen that happen. And when you do a final walkthrough 1 or 2 days before closing, buyer's not happy, now you gotta panic and rush to try to get that same contractor back out to the house to do the repair correctly. When we're so close to closing, we have to delay it, and you're thinking, what could a delay mean to both parties? It can't be that bad, just delay it for another day. Well, you've got logistics where sometimes the buyer's gotta move out of their rental place after a certain day, or a seller that's already got the U-Haul scheduled for moving out. So you don't wanna delay closing, so you wanna make sure that you can minimize that, and a lot of times a credit is what is done to minimize that. Unless if it's something severe, a lot of times I'll recommend my buyers to take the credit. And in this current market, here is a little secret tip from Tim Trevathan. Based on firsthand experience, and again, this is generally speaking, in the last 12 months, most of my buyers that buy, when they get a credit from the seller in terms of inspection negotiation, it is anywhere from $1,000 to $6,000 credit. So typically around $2,000 to $4,000, I would say. For townhomes, it could be anywhere from $500 to $3,000 credit because they're smaller homes. What is the biggest credit that a buyer has gotten, you may ask? I had one that bought up in Gainesville. It was a ranch house with a basement and a swimming pool, and they had a $20,000 credit that I was able to get them. And the reason why it was so big is because they had a brand new liner for the swimming pool that they needed to put in there, as well as mold in the basement they needed to remediate, and a brand new roof that was needed. So it ended up costing a lot of money, and we're able to get a very nice credit. The other big one was a house in Suwanee. It's about 5,000 square feet in Rivermore Park. And this one had, all the windows had wood rot, and the deck was falling apart. And since it was a big house, that means there's a lot of windows, which means it adds up the cost. That one we got $18,000 credit. Most of the time, you're gonna see between that $1,000 to $6,000 range. Now, recently I had one where we negotiated a $4,000 credit. And a lot of times when we're doing the negotiation, you try to aim high, and if they counter back half, it still ends up being a good amount to us, then we'll accept it. In some cases, you aim high because you never know, they may accept it outright without countering. And that's what happened to one of my clients recently, where we asked for $4,000. I only knew maybe there's about $1,500 worth of work, repair work that needed to be done, but they gave us the full $4,000. You might be asking why? Well, I think one of the reasons why is it depends on your offer when they accept it initially, what it looks like. If you do a full asking price offer and then you're willing to pay all your closing costs, which is typically 3% of the sales price, well, then they're more often than not to give you a pretty decent credit. Sometimes sellers empathize the buyers more in this kind of situation. I want to emphasize that you want to get in home inspection. I hope that we never go back to the 2021 market, because I remember one time I had a buyer, he had to waive his due diligence period so that he can get his offer accepted. And guess what happened? Now he's been in the home for 3 years. He called me up, and this is recent, and I couldn't believe it. He said, Tim, we've had 3 water leaks in this house since we moved in. And the third one being last night ended up flooding our house. I'm in such dismay, and I feel so terrible. And in order to get this repaired, it's gonna cost $18,000. My home insurance won't cover it. And because I didn't get a home inspection, I didn't know until this problem happened. Now, you could fault him and say, well, why didn't you do diligence period in your offer? Well, his offer wouldn't have been accepted. He wouldn't have bought a home. That was a time when interest rates were 3% right before they shot up. So he wouldn't have been able to get a mortgage payment that was that low. Who knows in the future if the rates come down, which I believe they will. But there's honestly so much that I could talk about when it comes to the inspection period. But I do want to mention in recap that you want to have a due diligence period. In this current market, you typically see 5 to 7 days as of right now. And during that time, you get an inspector out, you can do the radon testing, you can do the swimming pool testing, termite and sewer scope. Once you agree on that, your due diligence is now over. When there are repairs involved, it doesn't mean that the seller has to do the repairs within the due diligence period. It just means that both parties need to agree on what needs to be repaired. Then the seller has until the day of closing to get them repaired. Oftentimes a few days before, so that the seller can provide receipts to the buyer for proof of work done. Remember that once Once due diligence period is over, you can still terminate the contract, but you will lose your earnest money. The seller will keep it as part of collateral for the time that the home was off the market, then they now have to put it back on the market for another buyer. Another part of the offer is appraisal and financing contingencies. We're gonna talk about that next, so stay tuned. Subscribe and catch you on this next video.